What can you do?
Welcome, everybody. Good to be back. We are episode 17 episodes. Wow. This is going a long term with these series. So this is leadership lessons from across the pond with myself, Julian Roberts, and my wonderful, delightful co-host, Nancy Halpern. Good to see you, Nancy.
And delightful to see you as well.
Excellent. It is always makes my Monday afternoon seeing you and having this time with you. So it's great.
I feel the same.
So we're talking about mistakes, and we've got 5 big mistakes we're going to talk about. Well, we may have more than that. I'm sure we will as we get through all this. And I've made plenty of mistakes as I become a new leader, and I'm sure you haven't made many mistakes, Nancy, because I think you're very well versed and very well esteemed in your leadership. But we will see. Who knows? So I guess your thoughts really are on in terms of what do you think are the biggest mistakes that new leaders tend to make when they sort of get into that role?
Well, we don't have enough time for my mistakes because we'd have to add another digit to that 5, I suspect, especially if it's big. But I was thinking about this pre-conversation, and I think there's a couple that I see frequently. The first is a sort of urgency to action that is probably ill-advised. So a new leader wants to make a difference. They want to add value, especially if they're replacing someone. They want to show how much better they are or smarter they are. And I think that is a temptation to try to avoid, because as a new leader, you really have to know what you're leading. And not just, though, in addition to the numbers, the business, the priorities, and all of that, it's also your people. You have to know what makes them tick. So I think the first mistake is not taking enough time to know your team and the priorities and the business. I think the second is not building a sponsorship with your own boss. Now, you may have the same boss and you were promoted. Okay. But do you know those expectations now that your role has changed? Or you might have a new boss. Do you know what makes them tick? Third is not letting go, trying to do too much in the weeds, and therefore being thought of as a micromanager. You got to be able to delegate and trust your people. If they fail, you address it, but you sort of have to start from that point.
And just going back to that, I think your first point about that urgency to make decisions, that urgency to act, because I know myself personally, I had that, because you suddenly become this leader, and therefore you're assumed that you know everything, or you think you should know everything, and you should be completely competent, completely up there, because of course you've been promoted, you've got all the skills, but often, and I know I found to my own detriment, it's people are promoting you based on your potential. They know you're not the finished article, and you never will be, but they know that you'll make mistakes. They know that you won't be there, and I think that's the biggest one. And I find it sometimes difficult as well, where if you've been really successful in your individual role within a team, and then you get promoted, there's that difficult concern when you're in a place where you feel out of sorts, you don't feel very competent, you feel pretty useless, and it's a really difficult battle to work through, because suddenly you're in this place where you were doing really well, and then suddenly you're leading people, and then you're thinking, I'm not very good at this, and suddenly we get all that imposter syndrome, don't we, and start to self-sabotage ourselves.
Well, I think one inflection point I've seen in leadership is at a senior level, where you go from heading a function to being, how can I put this? To being asked to have an enterprise-wide view. In other words, instead of making your own function do their job, how does your function interact with all the other functions to bring value to the entire organization? What are you willing to give up so another function can succeed if that goal speaks to the organization's success? So being able to think with those two hats, both a functional excellence hat and an enterprise-wide view vision, is really a tough spot to be in. Talk about discomfort. But typically, fairness, that's a leader at a new leadership level. That might not be a new leader. So one mistake I've made, I wasn't my first leadership role, but I definitely made the mistake, was being too buddy-buddy with my team, believing they were friends. And the mistake that I made specifically was oversharing of personal information. It's really not appropriate. You should, I hope, have friendly relations with your team, but they're not your friends. And so, setting where that boundary might be is sometimes a very subtle thing, because you want to give them your best self and be who you are, but you do have to be aware that this isn't the same thing as being at home, even if you're working from home. So have you seen that?
Well, no, yeah, and interesting to make that point, because I think it's we've got this drive at the moment, or for many years, is bringing your authentic self and everything else, which is obviously really important and really vital. Make sure your core values and beliefs come across, and being transparent and open as leader, and they're all valuable and important. But you mentioned that aspect of boundaries, and it's making sure there's absolutely clear boundaries of what you do share, what you don't share, what's appropriate, what's right in that context. And then interestingly, I think now we've got that dynamic of that remote working, haven't we, where suddenly you're in somebody's home, which I think is, in some ways is a good thing, because you get to see people's sort of what's going on or not going on. But I think, does that make us more comfortable? Does that lower our boundaries, lower our thresholds? Does that make we feel we need to be all buddy? And I know the opposite to that is when you get promoted in a team, you become a bit authoritarian, not a buddy, because I'm the boss and I'm going to tell you. And that's another thing. And I did that mistake once, where I got promoted early on. And I'm saying, well, I'm telling you to do this, because I think they even use those words. Well, I'm the boss, and it was that, and that's like just absolute fail. Because as soon as you tell somebody that you are a boss and they should do what you say, you have failed.
Well, when you think about it, it's what children hate about parents. When a parent will say, "Because I told you so." So all that's doing is, and maybe sometimes that's an effective strategy if it's about safety, I suppose, or other really critical things, but it's an authoritative model of power. And we've now changed, I hope for the better, where we look more at influence than we do at demands. But, I did want to disagree with you about authentic leadership. I actually hate that concept. I do. I hate it, because this wouldn't be this week without you disagreeing with me, Nancy. Well, someone has to be fun, and we know it's not going to be you. You're too polite. Well, I'm too polite and British. No, they kind of go hand in hand. Yeah, no. Except when you've had a couple of pints in you, and then it's a whole watch out. It's a whole different story. But I think that it's just like the term, to be honest, right? Like when someone says, "Can I be honest with you?" What they really mean is, "Can I tell you something you're not going to like?" Right? Yeah, I get it. Yeah. "Can I be honest with you? You are just the best thing in the whole world." Right? That's not what you expect. And so I think this notion of authentic leadership has given people some sort of tacit permission to bring their whole self to work. Well, there are parts of my personality, Julian, I don't even like. Why would I want to put them on display with you? They wouldn't be helpful. They would probably be distracting at best. And so I do think we have to have a way of thinking that being a boss, a leader, means you are a role model, and you are modeling certain behaviors that you hope your team will emulate. You are building a microculture. And you can call those values or behaviors. They're all pointing to the same thing, which means some are better displayed than others. And I'm not suggesting you showcase inauthentic qualities. I'm saying being authentic doesn't mean always saying what's on your mind. It doesn't mean always throwing the truth in someone's face like a dead fish. And just to give you clarity on that, my definition of authenticity is not about just sharing out there, because I'm not a massive
get it all out there mindset. It's making sure you're demonstrating your core values and beliefs and consistency with that. That's the so. And the authenticity is making sure there's consistency with that, who you're interacting with, whether it's somebody senior to you or below you. Obviously, there's an element of context and how we interact with various people, but it's all about making sure you're demonstrating your core values and purposes and beliefs.
Okay.
That's authenticity for me.
Then, if that's, and I'm much more cool with that definition. So, what happens when you and your team, or with your team, you run across a problem that has a conflict of values? I think that as a new leader, you have to be really clear about your expectations in those values, because again, you're modeling certain things and you're building a little microclimate of culture. And so if you take actions that speak against those espoused values and principles of working together, especially these days, if you have younger team members, they're going to hold you to that.
Yeah.
You know, and so I think being able to develop those core skills of, I would say, sophisticated listening and response, meaning be careful you don't promise everything to everyone, but be careful you don't shut them down either. So I think that being a new leader is a lot of dance steps. There's a lot of dancing that goes in. It's really not an easy thing to do.
No, it's not. And I love coaching new leaders or emerging leaders, because they need that support, because I think you really do, because you need somebody to sort of bounce off. You need somebody to sort of share situations with you and allow them to sort of go through it almost in a role modeling perspective, because I think it's really tricky, and I'd wish I'd had a lot more support myself in my new leadership. I felt many years ago, you just get, you're good at your job, you're successful. Yeah, I think you're good with people. And suddenly you're a leader and you're like, I'm not entirely sure how to do this. And one of the things I struggled with initially was this whole letting go almost of my previous role. And it led to this whole lack of being able to delegate or empower or enable people, because I thought, actually, I could probably do it better myself. And because I am better, in the sense I was performing better than them. And I found that really hard, because then I'd be in a situation thinking, I could just get on with this and get it done in half the time, and we'll be the way there, or even get a better result. But I had to almost pause and stop and allow them to go through the process of perhaps failing and then learning, and then me supporting them and doing that sort of almost empowering process, which initially can be quite tricky. And also you're allowing people, you're trusting them, and they'll do it slightly different to you, which doesn't mean it's wrong or bad. It might be better in terms of results. And I found that really hard at the early days of leadership, in terms of letting people go, because I know I can get a good job done here. And now I'm taking this thing and I'm entrusting them to do it. And I'm hoping and if I didn't communicate well enough or effectively, then it could go horribly wrong. And that all comes back to me. So I found that really difficult, the whole delegating and empowering.
So there's a lot of leaders, new leaders, who struggle with that. And one of the things I've suggested for them is they just ask their people to do a draft, and let's use that document together as a way to learn to work together effectively, so we can get that kind of rhythm going. And so as long, when a leader says it's a draft, they feel a little safer. And frankly, your people may be a little scared. They want to please you. And also you may find that if you have an open door policy, it's abused, because people want to cover themselves. They'll ask you everything. So I think this notion of distancing yourself while still being present as a support is another kind of dance thing that you have to achieve. And with some people also, you have to stay closer to them, and others you have to pull away. I think a big mistake I also see new leaders make is a fear of getting rid of some of their people who are not great performers. So obviously in the first 3 months, unless you have a really egregious case that, HR is telling you for whatever reason this person's got to go, that's not a good time to make a talent change. But if after 6 months, you should really have your finger on the pulse of this team, I would say. And if you have a problem child, as I call them, it's like sour milk in the fridge. Okay, this isn't going to get better. So be proactive in coaching them, finding out the obstacles, seeing what you can remove. But if after a year you don't see an improvement, sadly, you really have to let someone go. And a lot of new leaders are scared of that.
And also, and I've been in a situation where I got promoted and I was almost doing somebody else's dirty work that should have been done prior to me. And that's always a difficult situation when you're promoted, then your boss goes, well, actually, you need to sort out this person. You're thinking, well, we all knew that. And then now I'm the one who's actually going to do it.
That's why they get you the bucks, Julian.
Yeah, exactly. So we've raced out of time, as we always do. I hope we found that interesting and thought-provoking, and give you some ways of handling those mistakes. There are many mistakes to chuck things into the chat, and we'll continue this conversation next week. Good to see you, everybody.
Good to see everybody, and of course you, Julian. See you next week.
Cheers, Nancy. Thanks a lot. Bye.